A deadly chemical attack in Syria and a warning there will be a big price to pay. Is this a defining moment for the Trump presidency? Let's take a look at this on this edition of PoliticKIng. Welcome to PoliticKIng. I'm Larry King. In the aftermath of a deadly chemical attack in Syria, Donald Trump told the world there will be a, quote, big price to pay, end quote, for those parties responsible. Yet only days ago, he surprised military commanders, allies, and leaders on Capitol Hill with his announced intentions to pull U.S. troops out of Syria very soon. So where does the administration's policy stand now, and what, if anything, can the president do to respond to the chemical attacks? We'll start with our political panel. They're John Whitback, chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia. He's also an attorney and a small business owner. And Jose Aristimuño, former deputy national press secretary of the Democratic Party and a political strategist. Both guests join me from Washington. All right, John, what do you think Mr. Trump is going to do?
Well, you wanted to know what Ambassador Bolton, now National Security Advisor Bolton's impact was going to be on the administration. I think we're going to find out. I think there's one of three things that'll happen. Number one, the president does a response similar to the missile strike that he did back a few months ago. Number two, I think the president takes a very severe action, punitive action against the government in Syria for this if they uncover hard evidence that it was in fact Assad that did it. Or number three, the president's going to do a hybrid of those two, and I think, you know, sort of one of the things we've seen in the past where we've been most successful, where you build a coalition and then you act with your allies.
Jose, what do you think?
Look, I agree with John in for the majority of this. I think what's important here, Larry, is that we ought to remember that President Trump has been very inconsistent when it comes to national security. Even years ago, before he even was president, he said time and time again that Syria was not our problem. So now as president of the United States, he needs to act like one. I hope, like John said, that he builds a coalition, potentially an attack on Syria. It's a high probability. But look, this is not only a short-term problem. We have to make sure that the president and with the Secretary of State and what have you, they look for a long-term solution to what's happening in Syria.
John, he doesn't pull his troops out, though, does he?
You know, it depends on what we find out from this president and his synergy with John Bolton. I think a lot of this has to do with a new direction. John Bolton was a surprise pick for many because of his sort of hawkish approach. President Trump campaigned on, has been consistent in, you know, America first and the policies that go with it. And so, you know, I think it remains to be seen how the two of them come up with a solution to this.
Jose, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham calls this a defining moment for the Trump administration, that the president will look weak in the eyes of Russia and Iran if he doesn't follow through on the big price to pay. Do you agree?
I couldn't agree more, Larry. This is a defining moment for President Trump. He needs to act presidential. You know, it's important for people who are watching to understand this is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democratic issue. This is an American issue. I think when Trump came into power, we've begun to lose a lot of the American leadership around the world that President Obama worked so hard to build. So I hope the president takes the time to act presidential and do what's right for the American people and for the rest of the world.
John, President Trump has tweeted that President Putin, Russia, and Iran are responsible for backing animal Assad. Now, Trump has steered clear of rebuking Putin by name. What do you make of that?
I think this is part of a larger strategy. I think that when you have a situation where the American people generally will favor military action of some kind, when you have atrocities like we're seeing happen in Syria, I think the president is responding in the same way he did earlier on with the missile strikes. And this is not inconsistent with his position so far when there have been human rights abuses and there have been atrocities. The president, you know, people that know him will tell you, you know, he's a tremendous guy with a tremendous heart. And this is not surprising that he's really affected by this.
Let's touch some other areas. Jose, does Scott Pruitt going to keep his job at the Environmental Protection Agency?
I certainly hope that he does not. I hope that he resigns as soon as possible. He has been horrible for the EPA, and his very priority should be protecting the environment, and instead he's playing favorites to the industry, to the oil industry and others. A lot of unethical things have been happening since he's been head of the EPA, including that he rented an apartment from a lobbyist, and a place where they were doing a bunch of Republican fundraisers. So I think he needs to go. We'll see. I mean, it's hard to tell at this point, but I wouldn't be surprised if he gets out. This White House has been in chaos and so many changes that it could happen, and very soon.
John?
Well, with all due respect to my colleague there, that's just wrong. Scott Pruitt is not going anywhere. I saw a great interview this weekend with Reince Priebus, who sort of characterized it, I think, the way I would echo, and that is, in Trump world, Mr. Pruitt is very popular. In the conservative movement, Mr. Pruitt is very popular. The things he's doing with the EPA, that's part of what was promised, the deregulation, the types of things. I mean, they just announced today a coalition of multiple agencies to make permitting processes easier for businesses. And as long as Pruitt continues to have those kind of accomplishments in the deregulation area, I think he's going to stay around. But the drip of these things have to stop. He's got to be smarter than this, and he's got to clean up his act if he's going to survive. But I think he will.
John Whitback and Jose Aristimuño are my guests, and we'll have more with them right after this. Jose, do you favor the deployment of the National Guard on the southern border?
I think it's not a smart idea. This was actually done, and it's important for folks to know so the National Guard was deployed to the southwest border under President George W. Bush and under President Obama. It was ineffective because any directive, Larry, by the federal government to send the National Guard to the border, they cannot act as law enforcement. So they're actually there for mere political reasons, for optics. They can't do much. The only solution to this whole immigration issue is actually passing comprehensive immigration reform. It's a waste of money to send the National Guard to the border. It's not going to do much. The influx of immigrants coming from Mexico is actually down. So we had to look for a long-term solution, and I think that's something that both sides of the aisle should agree upon. But no, it's a waste of money. We should look for a long-term solution to this.
John, I want to cover a lot of areas here, so we'll switch gears. What, John, is your reaction to this China-United States trade? Is it a war?
No, it's not a trade war. I mean, I don't know why anybody's surprised by this. The president campaigned on this in 2016. He vanquished 17 other Republicans who were running for president on an America First agenda, and we are seeing exactly what he promised he would do. Whether you agree with it or not, we all knew this was coming, and I think it needs to play out, and we'll see what the impact is in the economy.
Do you agree with it, Jose?
I don't agree with that, because what's going to happen is if we do this to China, China's going to do the same thing to us. So the middle class or economy, it's going to hurt. It's not smart politics. It's not smart for us to be doing this sort of thing. But like John said, I agree. Time will tell on what happens, but I don't think it's a smart idea.
Will it politically, John, possibly hurt him in the farm areas?
I don't think so. I think Trump supporters are baked in. I just don't think that they're going to over one issue. I mean, the man has shown, it's a very similar dynamic to what we saw with President Obama. Sort of a non-transferable, strong popularity with a base of voters that are going to turn out to vote for their guy no matter what. And I think that nothing has changed from where we were in 2016. And the question's going to be, what impact does it have on the midterms, which is something that remains to be seen, because the economy is going to really dictate that. I don't think it's too early to tell what the impact on the economy is going to be with this.
Jose, what do you make of many of the Republican candidates up for re-election in 2018 saying that if you don't vote for me, Trump will be impeached? Is that going to be an effective means of campaigning?
I don't think so. I think the reality of the matter is that Americans are looking for candidates who will help them, who would help the middle class, who will get them good jobs, healthcare, and what have you. What we have seen, though, Larry, the past couple of months in special elections and a few governor's races in Virginia and in New Jersey is that Democrats have been winning left and right, including over 30 state elections across the country. I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic that Democrats will continue to win come November. But again, it's because we're putting forward policies that the American people are looking for.
John, you think the Republicans should emphasize the tax reform?
Absolutely, and I think you need to look at the dynamic that we're at here in the United States in our political system right now. Polarization is really where we're at. Democrats, it's true, they've won a lot of elections, but Republicans have won a lot of elections too, especially in the congressional level with the special elections in early and mid-2017. And what we're seeing in the turnout is when we're not seeing a ton of races decided by independents. We're seeing races decided by which side is able to turn out more of their voters, and I think that's exactly where we are. The bottom line is going to be, are Republicans going to turn out more of their people over Democrats? And the campaigning on things like Trump will be impeached is designed to emphasize to Trump supporters especially that they can't sit these out and they need to show up and vote for Republicans in the midterms.
Jose, what do you make of the president's repeated attacks on Jeff Bezos and Amazon?
Again, look, the President Trump is always looking to pick a fight. He's a bullied, and he's always bullying people and always looking to divide America. His whole thing with Amazon, saying that they're taking, with the whole war with the Postal Service, it's complex. I don't think it's necessary. I think Amazon has done a great job. We should be empowering companies like that to come forth in the United States. We should continue to lead the world when it comes to entrepreneurship.
John, what do you think of the Amazon thing?
Well, I think this has everything to do with the Washington Post. I mean, the Washington Post, we experienced it in the 2017 governor's race. The Washington Post is all in on progressive candidates. Their editorial board is, look, it's my hometown paper. I read it every day, cover to cover. But I tell you what, it is, there are so many stories that are talking about unnamed sources and people briefed on the situation, people familiar with the situation. No more journalism. We're not seeing anything out of the Washington Post that resembles the old school, honorable journalism. We're seeing these anonymous source journalism, and it's driving a lot of the narrative in the country and why Donald Trump is so angry with Jeff Bezos. It's all about the Washington Post.
We're going to take a break and come back with some more moments with John and Jose. Don't go away. Welcome back to PoliticKIng. Let's resume the political discussion with our panelists, John Whitback, chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia, and Jose Aristimillo. Did I get it right, Jose?
That was good, Larry. Second try. I like that.
Former Deputy National Press Secretary of the Democratic Party and a political strategist. Both join me from Washington. Okay. There's going to be a race in Florida, one of the great states that you can't read in elections. The Florida Governor Rick Scott has announced his candidacy to run against the incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson for the Senate seat in the Sunshine State. John, what do you make of that race, and what will be its national attention?
It's going to be one of the premier races of 2018. The Senate map is very interesting. There's so many pitfalls and landmines for the Democrats in terms of the seats they're defending, and it's a much better map for the Republicans. But if you believe the polls, you believe the media, there's this just fictional blue wave coming. I definitely think there's a enthusiasm gap that needs to be fixed with our side, no question about it. But in Florida, it's going to be one of those bellwethers. If Rick Scott can beat Bill Nelson in Florida, I think we're going to have a really good night. If he doesn't, then you're going to probably see more pickups by the Dems than Republicans in this election.
Rick Scott is a big supporter of President Trump and Trump of Scott. Will Trump be the issue in that race, Jose?
Look, I think if Rick Scott wants to have a real opportunity of winning the Senate in Florida, he's got to stay away from President Trump. We have seen time and time again in the last couple of months that every race that President Trump touches, the Republicans lose. It's going to be a close call. I think it's going to be a very important race. There's a lot of Latino population in Florida, with the president recently, last year, deciding to take away DACA and nothing getting done on immigration and on the DREAM Act. I think that would have important implications into what happens. It's a little bit early to see who's going to win, but it's going to be a fun race to watch for sure.
John, there's an extraordinary poll from the Kaiser Family Foundation conducted by your paper and mine. It used to be the Washington Post. Ben Bradley was a dear, dear friend. 1 in 5 Americans have participated in protests in the streets. That is 19% of this group had never done so before. What do you make of what's happening in this country, John?
Yeah, I saw that. I looked at that extensively, and I think it's deeper than that. I think we're seeing participation in the political process on both sides. The phenomenon really started in 2016 with what we'll call Trump supporters, and that is people who were not even registered to vote a few years before and turned out to vote for President Trump. And I think we're seeing it now on the left, people that are against President Trump turning out. So this is an extraordinary time in politics, and I think the left and the right are both experiencing the same phenomenon.
Jose, will we ever come together?
I hope we do, Larry. We've done it before. I think it's not helpful, though, to have a president who continues to focus and try to divide us instead of put forward what brings us together as Americans. I think we can. I think the days of America, the best days of America are ahead of us, but we have to just make sure that we continue to find that common ground that brings us together and makes us the United States.
Gentlemen, John, Jose, thank you so much for your time today.
Good to be with you, Larry.
Turning now to Donald Trump's lingering legal troubles, only days after the president told reporters aboard Air Force One that he was not aware of the payment his personal attorney, Michael Cohen, paid to porn star Stormy Daniels. A motion has been filed by her attorney to depose Mr. Trump and Cohen. Will such a deposition happen? And what does the president's remarks on the payment mean for the case going forward? Let's get legal assessment from Kendall Coffey, former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. And here in studio is Trent Copeland, criminal defense attorney and legal analyst, very well known in Southern California and across legal circles across America. All right, Kendall, Trump said he was not aware of the payment to the Stormy Daniels. If he wasn't aware, how can he ask her to pay $1 million for every time she talks out?
Well, the theory that is being advocated by Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, is that it was a third-party beneficiary agreement, which the law recognizes. That is to say, yeah, Trump didn't sign it. Apparently, according to them, Trump didn't even know about it. But if another party enters into an agreement for the benefit of a third party, the law can frequently enforce that. That'll be the big issue, I think, for the judge to determine. Can somebody be a beneficiary of a binding agreement even if they have no idea it ever happened?
Trent, what do you think?
I don't think it goes anywhere. I really don't. It's like this third-party beneficiary, remember, this is the second stab at trying to make this agreement a good agreement, right? The first one was it's an agreement, David Dennison is Donald Trump, and you got to abide by this hush agreement. This is a little different now. Now they're taking another stab at it. This is, okay, since Donald Trump didn't sign the agreement, Donald Trump isn't allegedly David Dennison, he's a third-party beneficiary. But under California law, Larry, California law requires that if you are a third-party beneficiary to a contract, you have to be named in the contract. You also have to assent to the contract. That means, look, you just got to agree to the terms of the contract before you can accept the benefits of the contract. And look, that makes a lot of sense, right? If you sell insurance and I want to buy insurance from you and I want to insure that cameraman has to agree at some point once he learns of the insurance proceeds, he's got to agree at some point that he's going to be bound by it. So look, this isn't one of these things that I think is going to go very far in terms of the legal ability of Trump and Cohen to move forward with this.
Kendall?
Well, I think that what the judge is likely to do is first order a deposition of Michael Cohen. Yeah. That seems like the logical starting point, just to get his side of everything before the judge goes to the next step to determine whether or not the President of the United States will appear for a deposition, which is being proposed to be 2 hours. Those things the judge is going to look down the road at pretty soon, and then after hearing from whatever information both sides have, the judge will decide whether there's going to be a jury trial on the enforceability of the agreement. So I think Cohen's deposition is going to be ordered. I think that's going to determine whether or not the president also sits for 2 hours and answers questions under oath.
We'll continue the conversation with Kendall Coffey and Trent Copeland right after the break. If this is so perplexing, can Do you know of any lawyer who would pay $130,000 for a client and the client doesn't know about it and it's the lawyer's own money?
Well, that would be pretty unusual. I was trying to think through my own experiences, and I certainly haven't done anything like that. And I was intrigued that Cohen had indicated there were no bar issues with it, because if you are acting for somebody's benefit in an attorney-client capacity, of course you've got to tell them about a settlement. I suppose that the thesis here is that he did it on his own for a good friend, not acting as an attorney, and because he thought it would somehow benefit the common good to do it. Let's just say it's very, very unusual.
Why didn't he do it under his own name?
Didn't do it under his own name because he was doing it in the capacity of attorney-client relationships. And he did this because it was hush money. He did this because he didn't want anyone to know. I've never heard of it. This is outrageous, the very suggestion that he did this as a good friend and he didn't even tell him. And he wanted him to be benefited by it, but he was a good friend and he paid it out of a home equity loan. None of this adds up, Larry.
That makes no sense.
None of it makes any sense.
Kendall, what's your assessment of how Mr. Mueller is doing?
I think prosecutors would give him very high marks for a lot of reasons. First of all, is if you think about it, he's already brought into the prosecution fold two very high-value cooperators. Michael Flynn, Rick Gates, both of whom have had significant proximity to the president, plenty of connection to Russia, and now they have plenty of reasons to try to incriminate others. I think if you look at the Manafort indictment, if you look at the indictment of the Russians who are allegedly infiltrating illegally social media, those are so detailed and so impressive just from putting the facts together with various far-flung international data points. They look masterful from a prosecution perspective. So I think very high marks from prosecutors. Of course, he's not finished yet, and constitutional scholars will want to see where he ends up on some critical points before they give him the same high marks.
You think, Trent, that Paul Manafort might put the FBI on trial as attacking them, paving the way for a pardon?
I do, and remember the old adage, Larry. You know this as well as anybody. When you're a lawyer and you don't have the facts, you argue the law. And you don't have the law, you argue the facts. In this instance, I don't think they have either. So they're going to put the FBI on trial, and they're going to put the entire judicial system on trial. So I think really Paul Manafort may be a linchpin and a key to this. But look, he's holding out. Right? He's a man in his 70s. He's looking at a substantial amount of time if he's convicted on all of the counts. And so for him, he's got really nothing to lose. His viewpoint, I believe, and I think he's probably received a signal from the Trump organization and the Trump orbit that there's probably going, if he can hold fast and he can stay true to the team, there's probably going to be a pardon for him down the road.
Kendall, Trump's attorney has been informed that the president is currently a subject but not a target of the inquiry. What does that mean?
Well, to be a target in the federal jargon means that there's a probability that you will be indicted. So that's somewhat good news, but it's not the last word. And they're still pressing hard for an interview. By the way, they could seek to subpoena the president to a grand jury, provoking perhaps a lot of constitutional uncertainty. But one way or another, Mueller wants to talk to the president. And that, I think, poses the biggest dangers of all. Because we all know that if there are material false statements during the course of that interview, then that becomes the crime of obstruction. Whether or not it's federally indictable against a president, others might have to determine. But certainly, I think the interview is the most perilous part of all of this for President Trump.
You think Trump will sit down with Mueller, Trent?
Larry, I think he has to sit down with Mueller, not just because I think he has indicated in public that he wants to. You know, he's got a pretty brash, bravado attitude towards this, and I think he believes that he can probably, outdo Mueller and his team of prosecutors. That would be a mistake, but I think Donald Trump is thinking in that direction. But Larry, not just because Trump wants to, or at least he's indicated publicly that he will, I think the law requires that he'll have to sit down with him. If Mueller persists in this, remember, under Clinton versus Jones, under United States versus Nixon, a president must sit for a deposition or any kind of arrangement where he has to provide testimony, he must do so under federal law. So look, I think he's going to. I think he's going to sit down. I don't think it matters whether or not he does it under oath, whether he does it not under oath, because under 1001, if it's a false statement, the same thing that Martha Stewart went to jail for, if he tells a false statement there, that's a false statement. Under 1621, under the U.S. Code, it's perjury. So either way, whether he's under oath or he's not under oath, if he gives a false statement, he's going to go to jail.
Kendall, do you agree?
I agree that he's going to end up sitting down, and one of the big things he's going to have to come back to is James Comey. James Comey is somebody that the prosecution team is going to believe, absolutely. He's a former colleague. They have no reason to think he's got a motive to lie. If President Trump comes in and makes serial denials of specific things that Comey says, the president told me this, then what you've got is more than a he said, he said. You've got a James Comey, who they're inclined to believe, being flatly contradicted, as Trent pointed out. Whether it's a false statement under oath or not really doesn't matter. If the president is flat out contradicting Comey, I think there's going to be real problems.
And if you were the president's lawyer, would you try to get him out of that deposition, Trent?
I don't think that I would, and I don't think there's any way he's going to, because he just doesn't have the law in his favor. At this point, that horse has left the stable.
Thank you both very much. Thanks, Kendall.
Thank you,
Hey,
Larry.
thanks,
Thanks,
Larry.
Trent. And thank you for joining me on this edition of Politicking. Remember, you can join the conversation on my Facebook page or tweet me at King's Things. And don't forget, use the Politicking hashtag, and that's all for this edition of Politicking.